Hare Krishna, so I think we'll begin. We begin by offering prayers to Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Praya Krishna Prasad Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Dinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Bacharane Vishesha Srinivadi Askadyade Satarane. I'm going to go back over a subject which I've gone over before, but just to, since it's an important subject, I think it's worth going over. Namely, what Shiksha and what Diksha means, and how Shiksha is not different from Diksha, but is simultaneously one and different, and what the role, especially of Srila Prabhupada, is in the process of Shiksha and Diksha. Let me begin by saying that although in our society sometimes we glorify Srila Prabhupada, we even chant his name. And when we have temples, we have Prabhupada's Murti there, and we do Arti to Prabhupada. And we celebrate Prabhupada's Vyas Puj. Now, how much of Prabhupada's position has actually been understood and how much of Prabhupada's position has actually been accepted, I guess depends upon the individual and the individual temples and the individual circumstances. But I'm going to give some broad understanding from what I can understand. And some of the things I might say might be misunderstood, because it's easy to misunderstand this subject, because we have what we can say a collective consciousness within ISKCON. It's almost like we have our own catchwords, and as soon as you step into a realm which is we've been conditioned to reject almost spontaneously, almost like Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov was I believe he was a Russian scientist. Is that right? Does someone know if he was anyhow, he was a scientist. And he did experiments with dogs, that every time he rang a bell, he'd feed the dog some food. And after some time, just by ringing the bell, the dog would salivate, would produce saliva, even if he didn't give him food, because he became conditioned. So in psychology, this is called conditioned reflex. You set up a certain condition, and then automatically there's a reflex. So we have certain catchwords in our society which automatically elicit responses beyond any clear understanding what they really mean. They elicit emotional responses, and therefore they're either embraced or rejected, not on the basis of any deep understanding, but on the basis of our emotional feelings about the subject. That goes from, for instance, if we talked about female Diksha gurus, or if we talked about Varnashram, or if we talked about Ridviks, or where the jiva came from. Generally speaking, these subject matters often don't lead to rational discussions. They lead to emotional responses, and more on some parts, it leads to a defensive attitude. But therefore, dealing with such issues, it's difficult because if one is trying to convey some idea, one often tries to avoid the emotional response that might ensue due to that emotional idea. But in any case, clarity of reality should be there. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time. So in this Nectar of Instruction by Srila Rupa Goswami, there are many profound and relevant instructions for our society that should be deeply examined, but oftentimes, due to our leadership or other reasons, or just our own complacency, we're happy if there's less problems, better prasadam, and a more comfortable place to sleep. But that doesn't solve our inner problem of developing our actual relationship with Krishna. So here in this verse, which I'll read the verse because we should always read the verse. Krishneti yasya giritam manasadriyeta dikshasti yat pranatibis chabhajantam isham shushu shaya bhajna vigya ananya anya indati sunya hridayam upsita sangalabja. One should mentally honor the devotee who chants the holy name of Lord Krishna. One should offer humble obeisances to the devotee who has undergone spiritual initiation, diksha, and is engaged in worshiping the deity. One should associate with and faithfully serve that pure devotee who is advanced in undeviated devotional service and whose heart is completely devoid of the propensity to criticize others. And Prabhupada writes a long purport, which I'll just summarize, is that in the previous verse, Prabhupada has explained that our spiritual advancement depends upon our developing loving relationships, first with Krishna and then with Krishna's devotees. The most neophyte devotee, who's a devotee, he develops a loving relationship with Krishna and with his spiritual master, but he doesn't know how to necessarily engage in a relationship with other devotees. And the most advanced devotee, he sees everyone in relation to Krishna. Therefore, the neophyte devotee is generally concerned with, if at all, with deity worship. But because he doesn't know how to engage in loving relationships expertly with other devotees, therefore, generally he commits offenses, and due to those offenses, he loses his taste for pure devotional service and Krishna consciousness, and generally doesn't remain engaged in at least sadhana bhakti for a very long time. On the other hand, as Prabhupada writes in the Krishna book, in the story of Sudama Vipra, who went to visit Krishna in Dwarka, that the Vaishnav on the second class platform, he can see other devotees as being representatives of Krishna, and he behaves with them accordingly. And the most advanced devotee, of course, he knows how to engage in loving, appropriately deal with every devotee, and also he knows how to convince even non-devotees effectively how to take up devotional service when he acts on this second-class platform himself. Other than that, the most advanced devotee sees everyone as a bit better devotee of Krishna than himself, but we can't concern ourselves so much with that because we're a preaching movement, although we have to acknowledge that there are devotees such as Srila Prabhupada who are the most advanced devotees and were able to come to the second-class platform and effectively help innocent people and third-class devotees try to raise them to the platform of devotional service, pure devotional service, which begins at the second-class platform. Now, Srila Prabhupada is a special personality because he was not just a preacher, but he was a pure Vaishnav acting on the second-class platform, and therefore he was especially empowered to assist others to develop their Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada writes in this particular purport, he gives a definition in the explanations about different classes of devotees. For instance, the neophyte devotee, as it defines in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Archam Eva Harye Pujam Yaksharayo Bhakte ita daneshu chaneshu sabhakta prakrita smritaha. So the beginning devotee has 4 classifications, as explained in the Nectar devotion, in eligibility for devotional service. Are the ideal personalities of 3rd-class devotees are also exalted devotees in their own way. There's Gajendra, for one who's distressed. There's Dhruva Maharaj, for one who wants material acquisition. There's the sages of Naimisharanya, who is inquisitive, who were inquisitive. And at the same time, we have the 4 Kumaras, ideal brahmanas, who are in the mode of goodness. But initiation, specifically, becoming a committed devotee, is to help raise the devotee from the 3rd-class platform, simply trying to be on the mode of goodness, to the spiritual platform. Because by executing devotional service, regulated sadhana bhakti, one can come to the mode of goodness and come to the level even of the 4 Kumaras. But initiation specifically is to help the devotee make a commitment to come to the transcendental platform. And for that, one should at least act on the transcendental platform. Because in this age, our only means of going from the distress platform to the acquisition platform, where we want material comfort, freedom from stress and distress, and some material comfort, to the platform of solving our understanding more clearly reality in terms of Krishna consciousness, to come to the platform of liberation, where one is actually in the mode of goodness and free from all distress, accompanied by material misconceptions. The only process that can bring us practically to the mode of goodness in this age, no matter what platform we're on, is sadhana bhakti and acting on the transcendental platform. If we really want to come to the mode of goodness in this age, we have to learn to love Krishna, Ishvare tada dineshu, Pulisheshu vitsatsucha, prema maitri kripopeka, yet karoti samanyamaha. So any devotee, whether they're initiated or not initiated, even if they're whatever, they can follow sadhana bhakti. We've seen many devotees who have had spiritual masters who have fallen away from the platform of pure devotional service themselves, and yet the disciples continue to work and make progress towards spiritual life, if they follow the process of sadhana bhakti, and if they try to work on the Madhyama Adhikari platform by trying to love Krishna, cooperate with the devotees, help the innocent, and avoid those who are envious of Krishna or not accept their association. Anyone who does that will become purified and come gradually to the platform of goodness by transcendental association. But to actually come to the platform of pure devotional service, one has to have an attitude of service, not simply an attitude of one's personal advancement or one's personal happiness, either in this world or in the next world. That attitude of service is developed at the time of initiation, or at least theoretically it should be. That's what initiation is for, is to develop that attitude of service. Because without that attitude of service, without developing it, then initiation doesn't really have the effect that it's supposed to have. Now the question is, when we get initiated, who are we actually taking shelter of? Are we taking shelter of simply the devotee who's giving us initiation? Or are we taking shelter of our disciple succession? Or can we take shelter of our disciple succession by simply developing an attitude of service to them? So that's what I'll try to clarify the best I can now. Srila Prabhupada, for instance, he gives the exalted qualities of a devotee who's actually on the Uttama Adhikari platform. Please mute. Who is it that's not muted? Yaya Shri Devi Dasi. Gagna Yaya Shri, please. Spasiba. So Prabhupada gives the exalted qualities of the devotee who's actually on the Uttama Adhikari platform. He gives a short version, which can be easily misunderstood, that such a devotee is always chants his rounds every day, is always thinking of how to spread the Krishna consciousness movement, and follows all the regular principles. So that's a short version. One can easily misunderstand it and think, well, there's so many devotees who are Uttama Adhikaris by qualification, not just by eligibility. There's a different eligibility means that one is sincerely engaged in devotional service, and therefore they're eligible for pure devotional service. The four Kumaras, the sages of Namasharanya, Dhruva Maharaj, Gajendra, they became eligible for pure devotional service when they surrendered to Krishna. When they actually took shelter of Krishna, such as when the four Kumaras went to Vaikuntha and saw Narayan, then they became eligible for pure devotional service when they actually surrendered. Similarly, when the sages of Namasharanya heard from Sutta Goswami, then by that time they were eligible to surrender to Krishna. Similarly, when Dhruva Maharaj saw Krishna personally, not only within his heart, but externally, and became overwhelmed with love for Krishna, then he was absorbed in pure devotional service. And similarly, when Gajendra got Krishna's personal association, after Krishna saved him, then Gajendra also became a pure devotee. But before that, in their endeavor to become free from distress, or to gain something, or to get their inquiries satisfied, or to become liberated, they were engaged in devotional service, but it wasn't Uttama Adhikari devotional service. It wasn't on the highest platform. Therefore, when we hear that an Uttama Adhikari is always engaged in chanting his rounds, always following all the principles, and always thinking of how to spread the Krishna consciousness movement, we should not take it lightly when the words always are utilized. I think that's what was the exact word that probably used here. Here is the beginning of the purport. Out of many such Vaishnavas, one who's found may be found to be very seriously engaged in the service of the Lord. So that's open to our imagination, what that means, seriously engaged. And strictly following all the regular principles. That word strictly can be misunderstood also, or be left to our imagination. Chanting the prescribed number of rounds and japa beads, and always thinking. Prabhupada uses the word always thinking, not just sometimes thinking, but always thinking of how to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. Now, this is an external understanding of what an Uttama Adhikari is. And it's more or less leaving it up to the imagination or the discrimination of even an ordinary devotee to try to figure out if there is such a devotee who's on this Uttama Adhikari platform. And indeed, any devotee who's engaged in the service more seriously engaged in devotional service than we are, and strictly following all the regular principles more than we are, and chanting the prescribed number of rounds without fail on japa beads, and always thinking of how to expand the Krishna consciousness movement, always thinking of how to do it more than we do, certainly can, as Prabhupada will explain later on, should be accepted as guru. Because any devotee who can teach us how to advance in devotional service in any one of these spheres should be accepted as guru. Not that the guru has to be, surrounded by thousands of disciples and chanting his glories, and then he becomes a guru. No, anyone we can perceive who's more seriously engaged in devotional service than we are, who's always chanting their rounds and following the principles strictly, and always thinking of how to expand the Krishna consciousness movement more than we are, we learn from them. If we don't learn from them, who are we going to learn from? How are we going to learn? If we don't see the proper example, an advanced devotee, he may see that example in the scripture, but then he should manifest it himself. But if we can see others, if we look at others, automatically, every time we look at someone, consciously or unconsciously, we're judging everything they're doing. That's called intelligence, unless we're a dead stone. Unless we're so absorbed in material energy that we have no discrimination. Every devotee we look at, we judge them, whether they're more advanced in any one of those four things than we are. And if we see someone who's more advanced than we are in any of those four things, we have a choice. Either we can ignore it, we can become envious of them, we can respect them, or maybe we can even try to understand, learn from them by following the process of learning, which means submission, service, and inquiry. Then one can learn how to develop these higher qualities that help us bring us to the perfectional platform. Now, in a more elaborate definition of what I just read, because Prabhupada doesn't leave it at that, although for the Madhyama Adhikari, he gives examples, and for the Kanishta Adhikari, some examples, but he doesn't leave. He gives a much fuller example of what an Uttama Adhikari is. Because after all, if you have a train, no matter how big or small it is, what drives it is the engine. So the engine for any spiritual movement is the leader, the core leadership. If the core leadership is pure and advanced in Krishna consciousness, then the engine goes on. As we can see when Prabhupada was here, how he spread the Krishna consciousness movement. So then Prabhupada gives us an understanding of how we can discriminate and see who's actually an Uttama Adhikari by faith. That means who actually has come to the perfectional level, where they're always meditating on Krishna in pure love. So Prabhupada uses the word shraddha, so that means faith. So we're trying to find out who's actually a pure devotee, who actually loves Krishna to the greatest extent. So Prabhupada said that he quotes from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Shraddha Sabde Vishvasakahe Sudrida Nischai Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Kritahai. So this is the definition of faith. This is the end of the purport. If you're looking at the purport, you can read along with us. By rendering transcendental service to Krishna, one automatically performs all subsidiary activities. This confident, firm faith favorable to discharge of devotional service is called shraddha. In other words, give up everything else and surrender to Krishna. And then Krishna will take care of everything else. So that's called shraddha. Do we have our translation going on? Agnihotra? Agnihotra, are you there?
Да.
Do we have our translator?
Да.
Can she find the place where I'm reading in the Nectar of Instruction?
Да.
Okay. Harasha. Shraddha, faith in Krishna, is the beginning of Krishna consciousness. Faith means strong faith. The words of Bhagavad Gita are authoritative instructions for faithful men. And whatever Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita is to be accepted as it is without interpretation. That was the way Arjuna accepted Bhagavad Gita. After hearing Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna told Krishna, Sarvam etadritam manye anvam vadasi keshava. Oh Krishna, I totally accept as truth all that you've told me. This is the correct way of understanding Bhagavad Gita, and this is called Shraddha. It is not that one accepts a portion of Bhagavad Gita according to his own whimsical interpretations and then rejects another portion. This is not Shraddha. Shraddha means accepting the instructions of Bhagavad Gita in their totality, especially the last instruction, Sarva Dharma Prajaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Braja. Abandon all varieties of religion, just surrender unto me. When one becomes completely faithful in regard to this instruction, when strong faith becomes the basis for advancing in spiritual life. And Shraddha, as most of us will know, goes from Adal, Shraddha, just a little faith, a little liking for some of the process of devotional service, to association with devotees, sadhu sangha, to bhajana kriya, sadhana bhakti, to anartha nivritti, where we're actually becoming free from our misconceptions and our unwanted habits, to nishta, to steadiness in devotional service.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj, I'm sorry that disturb you. Mataji Lavangalata, вы на английском канале, переключитесь на русский. Вы почему-то на английском канале перевод. На русский переключите. I'm sorry.
Что это значит?
На русском все хорошо сейчас.
Okay.
That's all, Guru Maharaj.
Yeah, okay. So this is a process of coming to the perfectional level, to abandon everything and just rely upon Krishna. We're in the process of learning how to do that. Even if we come to the stage of nishta, steadiness in devotional service, it doesn't mean that we put our whole heart into surrendering to Krishna. Within our heart, there may lie certain desires that we may not be acting upon or even conscious of sometimes, but they may lie there. Therefore, one has to go through the full purification, full absorption in Krishna consciousness to come to perfectional level through ruchi and asakti and even bhava to come to the platform prema, where one's actual sincere desire to love Krishna without any other motivation is there. And the process is, as Prabhupada explains in the next paragraph, is to chant Hare
I'm sorry, Guru Maharaj. I'm sorry, Guru Maharaj. Mataji Lavangalata, вы на английском канале. Вам надо переключиться на русский. Да. Вот вы на английском канале. Я вот если английский выбираю, то я вас слышу, русский не слышу. И преданные не слышат.
Преданные не слышат?
Да, сейчас это пробуем.
Это проблема переводчика?
Problem with program. Work.
Не работает?
Все хорошо, вас слышно. Все, вы сейчас на русском канале вас слышно. Сейчас нормально.
Сейчас это хорошо?
Да. Sorry,
Работает. So now Prabhupada writes, when one fully engages in chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, he gradually realizes his own spiritual identity. So that's what we're actually trying to realize. We're trying to realize who we actually are, rather than this imagination that we identify ourselves with. So unless one faithfully chants the Hare Krishna mantra, Krishna does not reveal himself. So the only way we're going to discover who we are is when Krishna reveals himself. It's not a question of simply our effort or our great intelligence or our great sincerity or whatever, our great goodness. It's when Krishna decides to reveal himself to us. Now, there's no other way of doing it, as it says in the purport. And we must engage faithfully in the service of the Lord. And such service begins with the tongue, Prabhupada says. So therefore, we should always chant the holy names of the holy name of the Lord and accept Krishna Prasadam. And when we do that and don't do anything else, then the Lord reveals himself to us. Now Prabhupada explains about the perfectional level. So we should carefully note what the perfectional level means. When a person realizes himself to be an eternal servitor of Krishna, he loses interest in everything but Krishna's service. Or as Prabhupada used to say, he's completely addicted to Krishna. Always thinking of Krishna, devising means by which to spread the holy name of Krishna, he understands that his only business is in spreading the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. This is in line with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction, Yari Deka Tarikaha Krishna Upadesh Amara Aga Gurahana Taridesh. That our only business is that whoever we meet, we should try to get the intelligence, try to have the intelligence by studying Prabhupada's books, by sincere prayer to Krishna and to his representatives, and by service, try to get the intelligence by which we can help others become Krishna conscious. That's our business here. And the more serious we are about that business, then the more we become Krishna conscious, the more Krishna reveals himself to us. Such a person is recognized as an Uttamadhikari, and his association should be immediately accepted according to the 6 processes, Tadati, Pratigrinati, etc. Indeed, the advanced Uttamadhikari Vaishnav devotee should be accepted as a spiritual master. Everything one possesses should be offered to him, for his enjoying that one should deliver whatever he has to the spiritual master. A brahmachari in particular is supposed to beg alms from others and offer them to the spiritual master. However, one should not imitate the behavior of an advanced devotee or Mahabhagavat without being self-realized, for by such imitation, one will eventually become degraded. What we've learned so far is that there's such a thing as an Uttamadhikari, and if one becomes an Uttamadhikari, then automatically becomes a guru. If one is a Vaishnav, then automatically he's a guru. And that in the loving exchanges, that for such a person, such a devotee, one should faithfully serve such a pure devotee who's engaged in undeviated devotional service, and his heart is devoid of the propensity to criticize others, as defined here. Now, the last paragraph is very significant. In this verse, Srila Rupa Goswami advises the devotee to be intelligent enough to distinguish between the Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. Now, this is what all our instructions are meant for. How do we get that intelligence? Krishna tells us in Bhagavad Gita, by hearing to begin with. This is in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Chatur Sloki verses in Bhagavad Gita, to hear from devotees. And by hearing the devotees, what are they trying to tell us? Tesham sadatam yuktanam bhajantam priti purvakam didami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upiyanti te. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give them the intelligence by which they can come to me. So we're trying to learn, not only theoretically, but by seeing practically examples within our association and examples within our history of Vaishnav, of the Vaishnavas, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other books are histories of Vaishnavas who engage in unalloyed devotional service steadily and with full love and enthusiasm. So we're trying to learn from their example and instructions. The devotee should know his own position, not try to imitate a devotee situated on a higher platform. So our first business is to be able to try to see the best we can who's on what platform. That is, again, not just labeling people as being Kanisa Adhikaris or Madhyama Adhikaris or even Uttama Adhikaris. We try to see how much they're strictly engaged in following the principles of devotional service, how much they're sincerely chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, how much they're fully engaged in devotional service, and how much they're always engaged in trying to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. When we see someone more than we are, then we should try to follow them. And at the same time, we should know what platform we're on. When we're on different platforms, sometimes we may be performing devotional service to get free from distress. Sometimes we may be performing it to get some material acquisition, subtle or gross. Sometimes we may be doing it in order to satisfy our inquisitiveness, to understand things, reality clearer, so we can work in the material world more intelligently. And sometimes we may be interested in getting free from all problems by getting free from our material identification. And sometimes we may be performing devotional service, especially the 5 powerful processes of worshiping the deities, chanting the holy name, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, serving the devotees, and trying to make the atmosphere spiritual, which includes preaching, in order to actually be on the spiritual platform and experience transcendental happiness, bhava. But we should know generally what our platform of devotional service is, and not try to put ourselves forward as being on a higher platform than we actually are. That's called cheating. Out of the 4 defects of the conditioned soul, that cheating is the one that disqualifies us the most from acting as a bona fide servant of Krishna. Everyone came to the material world out of enviousness for Krishna, and therefore acting as if we're something that we're not. Cheating is a byproduct of that enviousness of Krishna towards Krishna and his devotees. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has given us some practical hints to the effect that an Uttama Adhikari, Vaishnav, can be recognized by his ability to convert many fallen souls to Vaishnavas. One should not become a spiritual master unless he has obtained the platform of Uttama Adhikari. Well, this is certainly something that's not discussed very much in our society, because in one sense it could be seen as rather an embarrassment. But we've already seen that there is an attempt to label those who've been around in our society for some time. They know after Srila Prabhupada left, there was an attempt to label some devotees who were chosen to act as initiating gurus, to give them the position of an Uttama Adhikari. And therefore, giving them such a position didn't serve very well our society. Giving them the position of initiating was no problem. Giving them the title of an Uttama Adhikari and giving them the material facilities, that is unlimited material acquisitions, freedom to do whatever freedom to choose their own, to be inspired in their own way how to execute devotional service without strictly following Prabhupada's instructions or working cooperatively under a GBC body, not simply as a matter of external etiquette, but actually as a servant of the body in order to understand more clearly Prabhupada's instructions. Therefore, we saw many problems within our society as a result of that. Now, at the same time, one should not become a spiritual master unless he has attained the platform of Uttamadhikari. So does that mean that only a Vaishnav on the Uttamadhikari should give initiation? So Prabhupada writes, a neophyte Vaishnav or a Vaishnav situated on the intermediate platform can also accept disciples, but such disciples must be on the same platform. It should be understood that they cannot advance very well toward the ultimate goal of life under his insufficient guidance. So what does that mean, insufficient guidance? It can be misinterpreted. Prabhupada gives us some hint in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that in chapter 1, text number 45 and 46, number 45, I believe, is Charyamam Vijaniyam Nava Martya Kariche. So either it's 45 or 46. That one should not be envious of the spiritual master, considering him an ordinary soul, because Krishna said one should understand that he's a manifestation of all the demigods. And Prabhupada gives a very elaborate purport about how a guru can be the guru in the Gurukul, helping to raise his children, the children that he has in the Gurukul, acting as a father to raise them to spiritual life. Or he can be the topmost guru, that is a representative of Lord Nityananda, or a personal associate of Srimati Radharani. They're gurus. And then Prabhupada clarifies the role of Shiksha in the next verse, or Krishna clarifies, where he says, Shiksha Guru Ke Ta Krishna Swarup Antaryami Bhakta Shesta Edurirup. Now one should know that the Antaryami, the super soul within the heart, as well as the best devotee, they're the manifestations of the Supreme Lord. And in the purport, Prabhupada writes that there are two types of Shiksha gurus. One of them is that those who are fully absorbed on the spiritual platform, and therefore they see everything as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. They just theoretically understand how Krishna is in everyone's heart. They actually see Krishna and they see the soul in everyone's heart. It's not just a theory, it's an experience for them. So that's called objective. And then there's the others who are not on that platform, but they have experience in Krishna consciousness. And they've been working towards Krishna has given them different levels of realization, and they're gradually coming to the platform of the pure devotee. That is, Krishna says, Dadami Buddha Yogam Tam, as much as we're sincerely engaged in service with enthusiasm and steadiness, then Krishna gives intelligence. And such a devotee can repeat the message as he's realized it with effectiveness. But then Prabhupada writes at the end of that particular paragraph that the Acharya, in the true sense of the term, who is authorized to deliver Krishna, enriches his disciple with full spiritual knowledge and awakens him to the activities of devotional service. So we have to make a discrimination between the topmost devotee and a devotee who's actually situated in transcendence, and the devotee who is actually has some level of realization, even up to the platform of Bhava, or actually before Bhava, Sakti, who is always thinking about Krishna, but has not come to the platform of realizing his identity in relation to Krishna. Certainly every level higher than we are has more potency to deliver Krishna to us, but only the Uttamadhikari can enrich the disciple to full spiritual knowledge. So then Prabhupada writes at the end Therefore, a disciple should be careful to accept an Uttama Adhikari as a spiritual master. So what should we glean from this? Well, Prabhupada's dealing with two different types of spiritual masters here also. One is that if we can find a devotee like Prabhupada, then certainly if we could take initiation from him, we could do that. Or if we take initiation from a devotee who's assisting Prabhupada because that's the service of every devotee in disciple succession, is to assist his spiritual master. But at least such a devotee should recognize Prabhupada's position as extraordinary. Now, for instance, I can't say that I'm conscious of anyone who prays to me, or I'm conscious in every one of my pictures. But Prabhupada said in a letter that he was conscious when one devotee asked him, are you in your picture? And Prabhupada said, yes, I'm in my picture. Prabhupada, as we know, there's a story in New Vrindavan, how one lady heard, she was visiting the Prabhupada's palace, and she heard a voice, take my shoe. And she couldn't see anyone around, only Prabhupada's Murti. But she kept on hearing that voice, and she wouldn't let up. And finally, she took the shoe and put it in her purse and left. And later on, after New Vrindavan came back to ISKCON, then she had a dream, and Prabhupada came to her and told her, bring my shoe back. Now, this takes a high degree of consciousness. Now, if Prabhupada is not in his Murti, how would this be possible? If it was just a statue, just like if Krishna was just a statue, then how do we talk to that Brahmin, the young Brahmin, and become a witness in the marriage of the young Brahmin with the elder Brahmin's daughter? Because, as the Brahmin said, that you're not just a statue, you're actually directly the son of Nanda Maharaj. So similarly, Prabhupada in his Murti is directly Murti, and he becomes revealed to us as much as we actually have a service attitude, as much as we surrender. And therefore, our greatest assistance in developing Krishna consciousness comes not only from, it comes from the association of the devotees we're present with, but we also have access to Prabhupada's guidance from within, because he's giving us instructions in his purports. And the service of the present day spiritual masters, whether Shiksha or Diksha, is to try to understand Prabhupada's purports and convey that message to the devotees in the society, so that ultimately they can take shelter of Srila Prabhupada. That doesn't mean that this overemphasis or this emphasis on Diksha should be eliminated, because Diksha is, there are disciples of Prabhupada in disciple succession who are offering Diksha and offering the attitude, or trying to help their disciples develop the attitude of service. But that attitude of service is not to them, it's to our acharyas in disciple succession, so that they can take shelter of Krishna. And especially in our society, where no one has been recognized in nearly anything near the level of Srila Prabhupada, the main service of the initiating gurus and those who are giving shiksha instructions is to let devotees know and instruct them how to take shelter of Prabhupada, especially through his books, but not only through his books, but through his disciples. Which disciples to take shelter of were actually manifesting and instructing Prabhupada's books. Not only the disciples in the society in Prabhupada's Murti and the instructions in Prabhupada's books, but also in the celebrations that we have for Vyas Puj and others, and in our personal relationship that we have with Prabhupada, that we can have with Prabhupada. Now, what's the difference between that and jumping over? Well, Prabhupada's never alone. Taking shelter of Prabhupada means to also take shelter Prabhupada's associates. And that when Prabhupada instructs us, it's also to instruct us how to take shelter of Prabhupada's associates. And when the associates instruct us, it's also meant to instruct us how to take shelter of Prabhupada and the other acharyas in this succession. So it's not a competition who's the main instructor. It's a cooperation and an acknowledgement who actually is moving, who can actually move our society forward in helping the devotees in the most dynamic way become Krishna conscious, and acknowledge that. And by acknowledging that and instructing appropriately, then one becomes empowered as becoming a bona fide representative of this disciple succession. As Srila Prabhupada became empowered by surrendering to his guru, one can become empowered by surrendering through the disciple succession if the disciple succession is actually properly connected and acknowledges who's actually the driving force, who's the actual founder acharya of our society. And therefore, because of his exalted position, the shelter, not only for this generation, not only for the shelter of the generation of Prabhupada, but for the generations of all the succeeding generations in our society. Everything has to be based upon Prabhupada's instructions, Prabhupada's example, Prabhupada's ability to be in anyone's heart who wants them to be there and to guide them. Guiding them doesn't mean that he'll guide them contrary to what the time, place, and circumstances are there and are being instructed by Prabhupada's representatives. Prabhupada's not going to act contrary, generally speaking, unless the representatives are not representing him. But if the representatives are representing Prabhupada, then Prabhupada will simply confirm what they're saying, as the Super Soul confirms within our heart what his representatives say. Anyhow, I hope I made myself a little clearer, but I'll save a little time for questions here, because it could be quite confusing what I said. Hopefully it's not confusing. Any questions?
Hare Krishna,
Yes.
Guru Maharaj. Thank you for your class. To make the things a little bit maybe more complicated, we have in ISKCON a little bit more complicated system with the GBC. And in general, most of the devotees are attracted to individual spiritual masters. So if there's some difference in, for example, GBC resolutions or like instructions of individual spiritual master, can you elaborate on this point?
The GBC. Well, the GBC, Prabhupada understood that when you're dealing with a large society, large movement, international society around the world, and you may not necessarily have an Uttama Adhikari at every stage for the next 10,000 years, a devotee who naturally attracts all the different faith by his empowerment by Krishna. And even if you did have an Uttama Adhikari who can give the conclusive arguments in any circumstance, there may be different, it may not be possible to manage a society in that way. Therefore, even when Prabhupada was here, he empowered his disciples to manage in different parts of the world. And often Prabhupada didn't interfere with their management unless it was absolutely necessary. Still, he expected his managers, to the best of their ability, to follow his instructions. So that's the GBC. Now, as far as individual spiritual masters following the instructions, our first business is to follow Prabhupada's instructions. And Prabhupada's instructions are to follow the GBC. Unless they're, so far deviant that it's not possible to follow them. But in general, Prabhupada's instruction is to follow the GBC. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything they say, but generally we follow them. Because without that discipline, then there's no question of spreading Krishna consciousness internationally. And at the same time, for some valid reason we disagree with them, then we may work in order to adjust the situation appropriately so that Prabhupada's instructions become clearer. It's not that the GBC may be the ultimate managerial authority, but that doesn't mean that they get everything right all the time. They can also make mistakes, as we've seen. Hopefully they can acknowledge them and humbly try to correct them, but sometimes that doesn't go on. But we can try to help them, assist them. The material world means a competition. Everyone's competing to be independent and the authority. And devotional service means to become a servant. Even sometimes the authority is not correct. Just like Prabhupada gives the example of a Shudra. Sometimes the Shudra has a bad master, still he has to do his duty. So since we're humble servants of His divine grace, Srila Prabhupada, therefore we follow his instructions and try to humbly cooperate with the GBC. But when we find, or any authority, but if we find that they're not, we may be able to assist them in some way to get a clear understanding of Prabhupada's instructions, and we could try to do that. We should try to do that, but in a way that doesn't create unnecessary conflict, because that will agitate our minds and agitate a number of other people's minds too. So that intelligence of how to do that will come from Krishna if we're sincere. And if it doesn't come from Krishna, then we should pray to Krishna and go on with our devotional service of spreading, becoming Krishna consciousness, Krishna conscious, distributing it to others. And hope Krishna will clarify and give us more intelligence how to rectify the situation if we find it's disturbing and interfering with our devotional service or spreading Krishna consciousness. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions? So again, we're trying to develop a vision, a transcendental vision. And that comes from, Krishna will help us develop it. Transcendental doesn't mean it's so far out that we don't know what we're talking about. Transcendental means it goes beyond the material concepts of life, like we're this body and the whole world is being manipulated by chance. No, we're spiritual beings and everything is going on under Krishna's direction. That's called transcendental vision. And one who's Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada's instructions, his conversations, his Vyas Puj, his Murti, his presence in the temple is all meant to assist us, expertly assist us in developing that transcendental realization. And Prabhupada's assistants, as much as they've taken shelter of Prabhupada, of our disciple succession and Krishna, they become also empowered to some degree or another to assist us in developing that vision and that inspiration to serve Krishna and his devotees. So it's a teamwork. We should see what Prabhupada's position is, what the position of Prabhupada's representatives are on every level, and we should try to serve them appropriately, as outlined in this verse. In loving exchanges. Anything else?
Maharaj, if because you are the closest thing to Prabhupada, so I wonder about why Prabhupada said to Brahma Tirtha about Lord Jesus that he was eating meat, but we cannot eat meat because it sounds like if a great personality does something that everybody follows, yada yada charti sheshta. So why would any great personality would eat meat and give such an example?
Well,
And
I don't
also
remember
people-
Prabhupada telling Brahmatirtha that he ate meat, nor do I think that Jesus Christ ate meat. But I guess even if he did say that, first of all, rather than getting into an argument with Christians, whether Jesus Christ ate meat or not, because there are many reasons to believe he didn't eat meat. In any case, even if we accept that principle, then it makes no difference in our devotional service. Prabhupada didn't eat meat, and he didn't instruct us to eat meat, only under extraordinary circumstances, such as there's nothing else to eat, then we might be forced to eat meat at times, at least a common person, under extraordinary circumstances. But right now, we're not in those circumstances. And therefore, unless you want to become a Christian and follow that particular aspect, that understanding of Christianity, that will not be very helpful. Prabhupada said that Jesus Christ said, "Thou shalt not kill." And every time I heard Prabhupada give a lecture to a Christian or a Christian community, he emphasized that point, "Thou shalt not kill." Why don't you follow his instructions? He never mentioned to them that you should eat meat at all. So I think we should, if we're dealing with Christians, generally most of us will not deal with Christians the way that Prabhupada did, because they won't accept us in authority, nor should we get into arguments with them and waste our time. But anyone who's eating meat without having to, they're violating either Jesus Christ's instructions or all our Acharya's instructions, and they won't be able to understand very easily what we have to tell them anyhow. Because that's what it says at the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Nivritta Shero Pigi Manas, that those who are actually surrendered, who've gone through the other 9 cantos, and have actually come to the platform of pure devotional service, they'll be able to appreciate the 10th canto. But not those who are killing animals or killing themselves. Pashug not. They won't be able to understand. So I don't think we should waste our time trying to convince people, that Jesus Christ told that, those who tell us that they're authorized to eat meat because Jesus Christ told them. And good luck in trying to preach to them. Better to give them some prasadam. Hopefully they can eat vegetarian food too. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nectar of Instruction ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Hari Bol.